quality of our lives is determined by the quality of our thinking. This is true both for us as individuals and collectively when we're a part of groups or when we're in organizations. The reality is that if we are going to improve the quality of our thinking in our lives, we have to understand, number one, what is quality thinking? And number two, what is the relationship between quality thinking and our lives and the quality of our lives? So, if we understand these things to be true, then we have to accept that we are not perfect as people. Our natural tendencies of thinking are flawed. They're irrational, illogical, full of logical fallacies, and biased by default, unless we have the knowledge, skills, and tools to manage our thinking. One of the key issue areas that we are challenged with in our society, where poor thinking is disproportionately impacting specific groups of people, is racism. Racism is a dehumanizing, historically rooted system that disproportionately burdens communities of color by reinforcing the superiority and power of white people, as well as the inferiority and powerlessness of people of color, while harming both. Racism has a process, and that process continuously, steadily, and stealthily exposes us to conditioning that ultimately leads us to make certain assumptions, judgments, and harmful decisions that ultimately support and reinforce the system of racism without us even realizing that that's what we're doing. I have to tell you, my husband and I have 5 children. I'm a little bit older than I look, like just a little bit though. And we have 3 still at home. And if it's not obvious, I am African American, so I'll just explicitly say that. And so my husband and I, early in our relationship, struggled with the challenges of racism and how it shapes the world that we live in and what it meant to raise children in that kind of environment where they're constantly receiving messages that tell them that they're limited, that their humanity should not be respected, that they don't deserve dignity. Now, that's a tall order, right, for a parent to have to think about those kind of things. And how do you prepare children to go out into the world, hold on to themselves and their culture as they're being bombarded with this constant stream of messaging? This idea of how racism disproportionately impacts communities of color is a common topic. However, we don't really have deep conversations about it. We think we do. But number one, we're usually not even in the same conversation because we're coming at it from different perspectives and different depths of understanding on the issues. We also do not have discussions that completely respect the complexity of the issues. And that requires us to have a sense of understanding about how we got here, where there are opportunities for us to hold up a mirror to ourselves and understand where we fit into the context of this story, this narrative of what's happening in our society, what's happening to real people in our communities, what's happening to my family and my children. There's a great quote by Gil Noble from his book that's called "Black is the Color of My TV Tube." He said that knowledge is the mother of all humility. The more you learn, the more you realize that you don't know. The other thing he said was that there are some people who acquire knowledge for the purposes of trying to dominate other people, and in order to combat that, we have to have better and more knowledge. Now, this is the role of critical thinking, because what happens is the constant bombardment of all of these negative messages about who people of color are, how they're supposed to be, they come at us so often that we, without realizing it, practically through osmosis, that information is getting stored in our unconscious mind. And the reality is, we navigate our lives, and if we are on autopilot, the way that we navigate is default status quo, and we walk through the world perpetuating inequities, treating other people in ways that reminds them that they're an other, making decisions in institutions and organizations about policies, about programs, about the culture of the organization and who fits that culture. And in essence, we are part of the system that we keep railing against. There's a reason why generations after generations, we continue to see the same inequities, and in fact, some of them worsen. Martin Luther King Jr. said that you cannot legislate people to love one another. And I'm not necessarily proposing love here, but what I am proposing is that we have to better understand how we work as people, why we make the decisions we make, why we do what we do, so that we can manage ourselves better. The research shows us that when we are not managing ourselves, when we think we have this whole social justice, racial equity thing handled, we are our most dangerous. It means that not only are we not managing ourselves, we don't realize the assumptions that we're making about who people are, who communities are that we're making these decisions for. So the challenge for us as people is to, number one, hold up a mirror to ourselves so that we can develop some humility. Number two, we have to be able to not be afraid of what comes back to us in that reflection in the mirror. And in order to truly see ourselves, we have to remove the blinders of the conditioning that we have all been exposed to, so that we can actually see what's in that reflection, not just as individuals, but as organizations as well. That means we can't be afraid to look at the data by race. We can't be afraid to look at the levels of an organization by race, because it's not just diversity for diversity's sake. It matters what the experiences people are having in the organization once they show up with their diversity. Is the organization actually ready to receive that diversity? What is the culture of the organization, and do they see that diversity within their culture as an actual competitive advantage, which the research confirms, that they need to tap into and foster? I struggle with a lot of this, and I have struggled with it my whole life, this constant search to understand what is racism, how does it work, how does it impact us, and what do we do about it? And for me, the first step that I mentioned was holding up that mirror so that we get that humility, but also to learn critical thinking skills. Again, our thinking by itself is messy. But when we have skills to actually manage our thinking, to surface our assumptions, our bias based on our experiences and all that we've been exposed to in our lives, then that gives us the freedom to be able to live our lives in the way that we want to live them, not in the ways that other people are telling us that we need to be living. Racism is used as a tool to control people. We get messages sent to us that have ideologies, which ideologies are nothing more than a collection of stereotypes and ideas that are summarized in short bites that as soon as you hear those words, it conjures up in your mind a whole set of thoughts and assumptions and visuals. And so when people say words like inner city or urban, that conjures up in our minds a certain visual, and it causes us to have certain emotions. Those emotions impact our thinking, and that thinking impacts how we behave. And so critical thinking skills are an important tool for us to combat racism and other forms of oppression and the messages and the ideologies that support them from driving our behavior, from driving us in ways where we make decisions that actually hurt us. I said earlier that as part of my definition of racism that it, while harming both, and the both was people of color and white people, the way it hurts white people is through that language I used earlier of as a tool of control. And so all you have to do is paint an issue with the face of people of color or some other marginalized group that we have all of these negative associations with. And all of a sudden, we've turned an issue that impacts all of us into an issue about those people. And then we make decisions, we vote on things, we take certain positions without fully understanding why we've taken them. We just take them. Ultimately, it comes back to hurt white people. Because voting is not an issue that's just people of color. Police brutality is not an issue that is just people of color. These are issues that are impacting all of us. Economic inequality, the wealth gap, all of these issues are not exclusive to people of color. But we have a long history of policies and practices that have led to those issues disproportionately burdening people of color. But make no mistakes about it, it impacts all of us. And the distraction that racism provides limits our ability to join forces to leverage our collective power across difference, whether that's in an organization, whether that's in our communities, whether that's on our campuses. We miss opportunities to see the shared struggle. We miss opportunities to see the shared hopes and dreams that are not limited to what our race is. And this issue of power as part of this understanding of how racism works and what it is. Power manifests itself in lots of different ways. We tend to focus on the way that power is held in institutions and in formal positions of power in our society. But there's also power with, which I just described, what happens when we come together across shared issues in order to leverage our collective power to work on those issues with the resources we have, as well as leveraging that power of when we come together in order to push back on the traditional forms of power in our society. In order to do that, though, we have to understand our power too, our power of agency. The fact that we as individuals actually do have a lot of power that we don't use. And that in our individual lives, we can actually be activists every day not just when there's a big march or a big rally where there's going to be lots of television cameras and it's an experience, but every day in our lives, in managing our thinking and managing our behavior and challenging ourselves and challenging other people, and not getting sucked into the oversimplification of things that are complicated, and making sure that we understand the issues that we are dealing with, that we research them, that we understand the sources of that data and that research. There's so many opportunities for us to exercise that type of power of agency. But in order to do that, we have to understand our power within. We have to understand who we are, how we are, why we are, and how that connects to the larger picture of what's happening in our society. Because that understanding helps us to have more agency, to do better with that agency, to be able to connect across differences in order to harness the collective power of people, and to be able to solve many of our challenges on our own as people without depending on the systems that we complain about in terms of traditional forms of power and structures. And it's an opportunity to push against those power structures. Albert Einstein once said that we cannot solve problems with the same mindset that created them. So what I'm proposing is that we reframe the issues, we take the opportunity to actually improve the quality of our thinking so that we can improve our behavior, so that we can improve how we make decisions in our personal lives and in institutions, and ultimately that we're able to improve the quality of all of our lives, not just some of us. Thank you.